All right, guys. So I want to talk about a poll I came across recently, and it wasn't any sort of new poll. This poll came out in 2022, but it made its way around threads, and I want to talk about it because I think that it points to a lot of the potential for demographic shift having significant changes in this country over the next 10 to 20 years, and points to how that can look for us. And the headline that I want to take away here from this poll is it asks a lot of questions of people, but mostly related to their views on capitalism, socialism. And this is a Pew Research poll, by the way. And it found that capitalism, the positive views of capitalism, obviously, there's more people who have a positive view of capitalism than socialism in this country, but it is extremely stratified by age. We have 57% of this country favorably viewing capitalism, while 36% favorably views socialism. However, that is very much weighted in the 65 plus demographic, where 73% say they favor capitalism and only 28% say they favor socialism. Meanwhile, if we look at our youngest age group, people 18 to 29, my age group, actually, more people favor socialism at 44% than favor capitalism. And it is much closer at the 30 to 49-year-old age range, where 40% favor socialism and 53% favor capitalism. Now, there's quite a few things to get into in this data that we looked at, but I want to start with posing this question. We know that the age-old adage of people getting farther right as they age hasn't been true for millennials. And it probably won't be true for Gen Z if we're looking at any trends here. So if we're looking 20, 30 years from now, when that 30 to 39, 49-year-old group becomes the 50 to 80-year-old group, the Gen Z is now the middle-aged people, and Gen Alpha is the young people pushing the envelope. I don't think it's completely unreasonable that we'll be looking at a country in 20, 30 years where the average American is more likely to favor socialism than capitalism. Am I crazy? Because I really don't think I am. TJ, tell me if I'm crazy or not.
I don't think you're crazy, but I don't think it's a guarantee. So I like our chances. I gotta say, I do like our chances, but you already know what I'm thinking. What might upset this apple cart here is that, yeah, it's been true, in the last, 20, 30 years, adults who, were born a little before that, they haven't been reaping the benefits of our American system, economic system. And, millennials, we did a story a long time ago about home ownership and millennials, and how every year the number seems to go down, and the average house in the country is like $400,000. And so you got millennials who are, 35, 40 years old, and they're like, I'm never going to be able to afford to buy a house. That wasn't supposed to happen. I followed all the rules. I did everything right. I went to school. I was responsible. I have a good job, and I'm still going to be, living in, Deer Park apartment complex for the rest of my life. And that's not what I can't afford to start a family and have kids. And so, yeah, that's going to turn a lot of people against it. However, boomers will be dead in a relatively short period of time, like, 30 years. They're pretty much all going to be gone. And when they are gone, like, that money's going to go to us. Like, that's going to happen. And so I am a little worried that once millennials start to make money, then they're going to be all of a sudden like, oh my God, this conservatism. People say that you're never more Republican than when you look at the taxes on your paycheck. Then all of a sudden you feel like a Republican for a second. So that could be the case. But the one thing one of the stats I saw in those polls we looked at that kind of warmed my heart was the GOP stats, and that 78% of Republicans had a positive view of Cal. I expected to be way higher. 78% is an overwhelming majority, but the fact that 1 in 5 Republicans would, admit on a poll, yeah, I don't have a good concept of capitalism. That's pretty stunning. So I think it's more likely to happen than not, but I just want to say that it's not a guarantee. What do you think, Brenda?
Yeah, one thing, my mom, she was born in 1950, and she said something that made a lot of sense to me. She was like, back when she was growing up, people could work as a gas station attendant at a filling station, and they could take their family on vacation. They could buy a house, they could do it all. And as time went on, I came in right at the tail end of Generation X, and this generation has been more people living with their parents than ever before. That or staying with their parents longer than ever before. And I think, being raised by two boomers and growing up, with the idea in my mind, I really thought when I was younger, okay, I'm going to grow up and I'll just get a job down at the factory, and when I do, I'll be able to pay all my bills and I'll be able to buy a home, and I'll be able to take my kids on vacation and all those things. And none of that happened, because by the time I made it into the workplace, it felt like that, the whole deck was so stacked against me, I could never pull out. And it just seemed like the further we went with it, the worse it's got for people like us.
Yeah, it is interesting to look at it generationally, and so there is that conventional wisdom that TJ's bringing up about how, yeah, maybe now millennials aren't moving farther right, but millennials also haven't seen the money drop from the boomers. And that is to a certain extent true, and it could foil the entire plot here. But I will say, I feel like in generations past, the torch has been passed way earlier. The economic torch, the people who are owning the land and having the family. Like, I saw a recent report show that there of large family homes, which I don't know how they defined large, but they said the majority of large family homes are owned by boomers without children living with them. And they outnumber the amount of millennials with children who own large homes. And it's like, yeah, that is even once that money siphons down, is it going to most millennials, or is it going to be going to some millennials? That's a big question. Like, it's going to get filtered down. Those student loans are going to get paid off, and there's going to be a couple wealthy people who are receiving a lot of the money, but is it really going to filter down as evenly? Or, not to say it filtered down very evenly in years past, but in generations past, is it going to have a similar distribution, or is it going to be highly concentrated in terms of where that money's going? That plays a big factor. I also think that the period in time in life in which that money transfer is going to happen is going to change things significantly. Because when someone, their late 20s, grandma dies and their nuclear family circumstances change, and they now have the ability to own a home and start a family at an earlier age, and okay, now I have a mortgage and these payments, and oh my God, that tax bill, Reagan, please take this away. That makes sense. But when you're 50 and you're finally being able to buy a home, you may or may not have had a kid. You have the economics handled now, but well, you've lived most of your life at this point, all of your formative years, realizing how rigged and screwed the system is. Are you really going to change that much because you have money now? Like, obviously you'll change somewhat, but overwhelmingly will the generation change? Again, I'm speculating, but I wouldn't even say that that's likely. I would say that's probably more likely than not that, yeah, some people are going to move right, but more people are going to keep moving farther left as long as the status quo remains the same. And that's not really going to change until probably a decade from now, I would think.
I agree. I agree. That's definitely more like, and that's a great point about the starting a family and buying a home, and how important that is for your outlook on life. And I was looking at these charts. I like these election charts for the country, where it says, well, this is what the presidential election will look like if only, Asian women voted or something, just shows you like very particular stuff throughout the country. And the one that, jumped out was the marriage map. If only married people voted, Trump would have had like 450 electoral votes. Like, it is wild how strong the shift is for marriage. And it's exactly for the reason you said, is that, fewer and fewer people are getting married these days because they can't afford to, and even fewer still are having children. And when you miss out on that early on, it gives you a long time to sit and think about why you can't, afford the things that everyone, like, not even, these people aren't asking for a lavish lifestyle here, just afford the things that everyone said you would get if you played by all the rules. And it's not happening. And also just looking at the data and how not only I can't remember if it's Gen X or millennials that this will first hit, where will have shorter lifespans than boomers. I can't remember which one of us it was, if it was Gen X or millennials, but that's completely counter to what you're supposed to try to build, as a society. So I remember in college, I took this course, some economics course, some political course, and it showed data for college students going back over the years. And it showed that, at 21 years old, your average college student, like say there was like 60% Democrat and 40% Republican. And I remember professor saying, okay, so I want you guys to just take guesses that when they ran these numbers, 30 years later, how much change do you think happened? And I was thinking, okay, but so what everyone tells you, that people get more conservative. Yeah, they do, but it was like 2 or 3%. I was stunned. Like there's almost no change at all from when for the average person when they're early to mid 20s to when they're 50. They kind of stay somewhere along the same political axis. So yeah, that's a great point, John, that when the money hits, it plays a really big deal because
you might not remember, was that just looking at college grads they don't
just
change?
college grads.
Yeah, because that makes sense to me.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I imagine that the average non-college grad might experience that shift a little differently.
Yeah, absolutely.
I know. What do you think, Brando?
Yeah, I think you guys are on something. I think more people will move to the left as they get older, but not to be a pessimist. One of my friends, one of my real good friends, his dad, back in the '60s was a big supporter of Bobby Kennedy, all that, and then over time he shifted and became a Reagan supporter, and then later on was supporting the Iraq War and was behind George W. Bush. And I don't know, I've often wondered, there were a whole lot of hippies back in the day that were anti-war and very progressive minded people, and then as time went on, a lot of those people shifted. And I don't know if there could be some sort of cultural event that could happen in the future that would cause people to go the other way, but I just feel like that more people are going to the left because I feel like that's the only way they can make it in the world. If that makes any sense.
It makes perfect sense, and it is the difference between being your politics being determined by aesthetics and your politics being determined by, for lack of a better term, economics. Because these guys behind me here, Rage Against the Machine, you constantly hear nowadays about how conservatives are like, oh, Rage Against the Machine went woke, and it's like, did you listen to a single one of their songs? They don't hide it. They are straight up. They will tell you they're communists. They don't hide. Also, how did you ever become fans of Rage Against the Machine if you are saying they're becoming woke? It doesn't make any sense. But it's because people join these political movements for the aesthetics. The aesthetics of this band was anti-authority, and a lot of people liked the anti-authority aesthetics. They never listened to the words, and they're like, I connect with this band. But when they actually listen to the words, they're like, oh shit, no, I don't. And the same thing I feel like happened with the hippie movement. That was something that I definitely was very confused about earlier on in my life. I was like, wait a second. All the old people were the hippies in Forrest Gump, but they're old now and they're not the hippies anymore. Where the hell did they all go? And it's like what I've read, is like a lot of them were more for the aesthetics of the hippie movement and didn't really engage with the philosophy of it. And that's why, as their economic situation changed, so did their politics. But I don't know. Brando, are you a Gen Xer? Is that your generation?
Yeah, I came in right at the tail end of it because I was born in 1980. So depending on where you look, some people says that's the tail end of Gen X. Some people says it's millennial. So I'm right there at the end of it.
So would you say, because you weren't a hippie, but you definitely listened to these bands, growing up.
Oh yeah.
All of the the further left metal bands, like all of them that definitely I feel like established the 90s for sure. That anti-authoritarian grunge aesthetic, and that's a very kind of socialist aesthetic. If we're gonna make a comparison here, but the Gen X, what was it? What did it say? 50 to 64 abouts was fairly extreme. 62% favor capitalism, 32% have positive views of socialism. Would you say that's kind of I have the right assessment there for your generation as well? Just like the ones that identified the anti-authoritarian, but they didn't really know why?
Yeah, I could definitely see that, and I've seen that a lot. I've been a musician for over 25 years, and I've seen a whole lot of people here lately. Like loving Rage Against the Machine, and I'm like, but like you said, it's like, did you really listen to what they had to say?
Hmm.
They're one of my favorite bands, a band out of Athens, Georgia, called the Drive By Truckers, and they're a very progressive band, and they always have been from the very first album they put out. I knew exactly where they stood politically. It was blunt. But they really didn't talk it in their interviews. When they were giving interviews, they didn't really talk about it. They just sort of let the characters in the song say it for them. But then when Donald Trump got elected, they just came out full throttle, like, hey, we're against this. We don't want you even at our shows if you support this guy. They came out really hardcore about it. And all of a sudden, their fans was going, I don't like their politics. I can't believe they're liberals. I can't believe they're, and I'm like, they've been since the first album. Like, how did you not hear that? I think a lot of people gets caught up in the image of anti-authority, and then they just apply it wherever they want to.
Hmm.
As opposed to if they actually listened to what these people were saying from the start, they wouldn't have ever liked. I know guys, that will sit and quote Rage Against the Machine, and I'm like, yeah, but do you know what they really were about? They just apply it to where they want it to fit, if that makes sense.
Oh,
No,
it
it
makes perfect
does.
sense.
Yeah, they've got no media literacy whatsoever. It's just they got fucking goldfish brains, man. It's wild to watch the shit. It's the same people that complain about, oh, I can't believe X-Men is woke. It's like, what the fuck are you talking about? It's like
Yeah.
you missed the point of the entire story. But I did want to say, so you mentioned how a lot of Gen Xers, or you had a guy who was a Bobby Kennedy fan, and he
Yeah.
ended, super far to the right and everything. And so I feel like Darth Vader addressing Obi-Wan Kenobi with Bobby Kennedy here, that now his failure is complete. Like, not only did his biological son end up a wild, insane clown, but his ideological
Oh
son ended
man.
up the same as well. Yeah, way to go, Bobby. But
Yeah.
so you mentioned also with the hippies and how the hippies were anti-establishment, they were against war and everything, and it's weird that they did this a huge turn. I don't think it's all that weird actually, because hippies, like, what did the hippies want? The hippies wanted to get high, they wanted to fuck, they didn't want to shoot anybody in a war. They're libertarians. That's what they are. Like, they were just
That's a
libertarians.
really good
That's a good
point.
point.
And yeah, and so, then the libertarians in the 60s and 70s, they were just broke kids, but then in the 80s, they all got high paying jobs. And they're QAnon folks now. I don't see too much of a difference at all, because everything the hippie said
Yeah.
can pretty much be laid on, exactly over what the Trump supporters say now.
That is,
Yeah, that's a really good point, man. It really is. That's a great point.
it's
And I think libertarian's another one of those words, kind of like independent, where when I hear someone say they're a libertarian, I just say, you're a Republican with a guilty conscience.
Yeah, yeah.
It's
Yeah,
like,
exactly, yeah.
so
we
yeah.
we definitely like to take shots at libertarians here on the
Oh.
left wing. It is one of our favorite pastimes because at least the Republicans like don't pretend, or not, at least a lot of the Republicans don't pretend like they know the right answers. They just, hate whatever. But the libertarians will, with their whole heart, be
Oh,
like, oh, I researched the hell out of this. And it's like, really? Because it seems
Yeah.
pretty obvious this is stupid on its face.
fish in a barrel, man. Fish, and I love it when libertarians say, "Well, socialism it works on paper, but not in practice." Buddy, libertarianism doesn't even work on paper. Nothing about it makes any sense whatsoever. Yeah, we're gonna have no rules in the society at all. There's gonna be, no. We really believe in property rights, but we don't believe in government. It's like, what? Who's gonna define who has the property? It's just, none of it makes any sense at all. And just with no shame, they all think that if the government just got out of my way, I would be Jeff
Mhm.
Bezos. It's like, no, man, you'd be one of the slaves, to the 4 trillionaires on planet Earth. That's what would happen to you. It's just the delusion that goes into it is just very funny to me. But that's why they're so easy to make fun of.
Yeah.
Now, the one last stat I want to mention, two other stats before we wrap this segment up from these. And this is, by the way, if you guys look this up, the Pew Research poll, modest declines in positive views of socialism and capitalism in the U.S., there is a lot of interesting tidbits here for anyone who's interested in doing further research. But one of the two stats that I want to point out are, that somehow, some way, I do not understand, but 40% of this country either views both capitalism and socialism positively or both capitalism and socialism negatively. And I just wanted to ask you guys what the hell you think they're smoking. Because I do not understand. Like,
I
you're
do.
like, fuck capital. What is your op? What is your third
I
option?
do.
It's like, I don't want economic systems. Like,
So if you don't mind, Brett, I had to go first because I was going to bring this up too,
No,
John.
go
Thank
ahead.
you. Because
Yeah.
the important thing to remember with this poll that we have to really see it through this lens is that your average person could not properly define socialism or capitalism to you. They couldn't do it. Like I'm not trying to be a snob here, but you have people saying, yeah, of course, we have a democracy. We're a capitalist country, as if those things are related in any sense at all. Or especially socialism is even worse because to them, socialism is, a guy in a beret and a funny mustache, sending death squads to take over your family. They don't know what the fuck it means. And even the ones who have like a more generous view of it, the ones who were brought in by Sanders, Bernie Sanders a few years ago, is they see, social democracy as socialism, which it's not, but, that which does, it doesn't blend capital and socialism, but to them, that's what they think it is. So I think it's just the lack of understanding of the terms that show those weird numbers there, which does kind of throw all the poll numbers off because I don't think more than half the population could accurately define those systems.
what do you
Yeah,
think,
I
Brad?
agree. And that statistic jumped out at me too when I read the article. I don't want to jump the gun or get ahead here, but there was another one leaped out at me too, and I hope I'm quoting this right, but I've made some notes here. But it was saying that 68% of men have a positive view of capitalism, but only 48% of women. And I've wondered, I'm sure there's a lot of reasons. You guys probably speak to that better than me. That women would not view it as favorably as men.
Oh yeah, it's the same. John and I, we once again we love dunking libertarians, but one thing that we always mention is this very same thing is that you don't find a lot of female libertarians. Like you don't.
Yeah,
Like
exactly.
anyone who has the slightest awareness of the precarity of their existence, females, minorities, people with disabilities, like people who's like, oh man, one false move and everything could fall apart for me. No, you're not going to find a lot of them in the number of libertarians. What you do find are a lot of healthy, strong white males. Like they are all,
Yeah.
and in the black community, it's going to be all a bunch of men too. Like Trump's numbers actually went up with black people between 2016 and 2020. Like almost exclusively was it through black men and who see, well, once again, like it's kind of like, every dude thinks, man, if I hadn't hurt my knee, I could have gone D1, and how guys think that. It's the same thing, but with economics. That, if I really just, if the constraints of the government just weren't on me, I could really crush it. And that's why, yeah.
It's
John?
Yeah,
it,
and go ahead.
no, I want to hear what you have to say, Brenda.
Well, in Kentucky, with Governor Andy Beshear, Kentucky's a red state, and Andy Beshear won re-election. And a good friend of mine pointed out something I hadn't really thought about. He was like, I believe at the end of the day, what happened is that the women in Kentucky, they may have been listening to their husbands bitch every day about everything, but they showed up at the polls and they voted, for Andy Beshear. And I think a lot of times, that's the case. I think they may be married to a guy who has a positive view of capitalism, but when they go in there to vote, they vote their way and come back out and probably don't say a word about it,
Yeah, and I like the distinction that you made there because it also, I think it speaks to some of the other differentiations that we see, that there is for the people who understand the difference between socialism and capitalism, or at least even have a vague idea of the outlines of the philosophy, it makes sense that women would be more drawn towards socialism. Think about how we raise women versus men in this society. Like we raise men to go out and be the breadwinners, to go out, like, you got to provide for the family. It's you have to protect your family. It's also very nuclear family oriented. The women, it's very communal. Like you're not gonna, again, this is overarching how we raise each gender, not necessarily how we should do it or whatever, but how we typically do it is, hey, women, you got to learn how to be more emotionally intelligent. You've got to learn how to support a man who's going to provide for you. It's about the community's success is going to enrich your life. That is how you win. And so it makes sense that they would find a system which is a little more community based to be more favorable. And you look at it in the racial demographics too, which you brought up here, and it also has quite a few interesting tidbits. The The one that might be obvious is more overwhelmingly supportive of socialism are Asians, which makes sense considering there are more socialist and communist countries over there. And so just they have more exposure to it not being this pure evil thing that we're raised to believe here in America, but also just their overall Eastern philosophy is much more communal, while Western philosophy tends to be more individualistic. And you see the same sort of divides there. And then the other racial demographic that is actually most supportive of socialism are actually Black people, with 52% reporting positive or very positive views of socialism compared to 40% for capitalism. And that is probably by far the largest distinction, but besides white people, who are 31% in favor of socialism and shockingly 62% in favor of capitalism. So I feel like there's two things going on there. There is those who have power and those who don't to divide, because we see that definitely in the income brackets, but I also think it's more the philosophical divide. Now, I don't know. I know that, influential Black leaders like Malcolm X, MLK, obviously were socialists, or not obviously to most Americans, but to anyone who studies history, obviously were socialists. But I honestly don't know. Obviously Eastern philosophy tends to be more communal. TJ, totally, if you don't know the answer, that's fine, but you probably have a better guess than me. Would you say that is a distinction in Black communities and cultures, or would you say that's more of a haves and haves not sort of thing?
So I think that you have to combine two sets of overlapping magisteria here. And that is we mentioned that women are going to be more supportive of socialist policies. And one group that I don't know if we did it cover Black Protestants? I didn't know if I saw that on there.
Did it specifically cover Black Protestants? I don't think so.
Yeah, because I didn't see it either. So what's interesting is I like to point this out too, because I grew up in a Christian evangelical culture, and white Protestants, evangelical Protestants, vote something like 80 to 85% Republican. It is the exact opposite for Black Protestants. They vote 80 to 85% Democrat. And I always like to point this out too, that, okay, listen, I challenge you to find me any significant, differences in doctrine between Black and white Protestants. It is the exact same religion. They worship the same God. They read the same Bible, but they have and they all believe that God is super important when it comes. I'm getting somewhere with this, trust me. They all believe that God is very important when it comes to the Holy Spirit leading you in selecting leaders to guide the nation. So if that's the case, why is God telling Black Protestants something different than white Protestants? Like why?
Great question.
Yeah, and so I ask this, to white Protestants a lot. And they'll all be like, well, I don't know. Yeah, you do know the answer. The answer is you think that the Black Protestants aren't actually talking to God. They don't like saying it out loud. But to be fair, Black Protestants think the same thing. But the answer is he's not talking to either of them. Let's because it's all just based on your culture. But where I was going with this was, so Black women are the largest church-going demographic in the United States. You can't find another Christian demographic that attends church more often. And I remember talking to a friend of mine from college, and it was Republican. I brought this up to her, and she said, "Oh, that's kind of weird." And I was like, "Oh, why is that weird?" She says, "Well, because the Republican Party is more in line with biblical values." I was like, "No." It just depends on how you interpret it. So if you're a Black Protestant and you're a woman, those overlapping views of society and culture almost force you to go into a more socialist direction. So I would imagine that's where the lion's share of that support comes from. That'd be my guess on that.
Jesus was definitely a well-known socialist. So
Yeah.
that does track. Congratulations, guys. You made it to the end of the episode. And you know what that means. You personally are my favorite viewer because you helped us out in the algorithm. And I am sure you're already subscribed and click that like button, but make sure to do that if you haven't already. And you know what else you should do? You should definitely check out our excellent guest, Tennessee Brando. Brando, tell our audience where they can find you.
You can find me on YouTube and Facebook as Tennessee Brando. On the TikTok app and Instagram, I am TN_Brando. So that's where everyone can find me.
Thanks so much, guys. Folks, John was not kidding. You really are his favorite viewer. I checked earlier. Your medal is actually in the mail. So, go outside and look for it, but not before liking, commenting, subscribing, and sharing this content with your friends, family, and loved ones. We would appreciate it.